Welcome to Regener8d Radio, Season 4, Episode 2. No, really, we're back. I know we had a very long hiatus between Season 3 and Season 4, and then we recorded one episode where I introduced to you Wes Russell, who is another one of our hosts that we're bringing on in this particular season, which we're really excited about, and I'm glad to have Wes on board with us, and we'll continue to chat with him soon as well. But I wanted to let you know the reason that we haven't recorded anything else is that both Wes and I have been really busy, for one, particularly myself, and I do most of the recording and uploading, all of those things. And the reason for my busyness is, well, one, the church has been keeping me very busy over the course of the past couple of months since we recorded that episode. But also, praise God, we finally found a house here in Kansas and have gotten moved into that house, and it's been a massive blessing to us. And so we're really excited about that. And now we're gearing up for our conference. And so I'll quickly mention that as part of this sort of announcements here at the beginning. We do have a conference here at Trinity Baptist Church in Wamego, Kansas. So if you're in the Northeast Kansas and the Midwest kind of area, I'd highly recommend you come to that. We have several great speakers coming in and one who's just okay. That'll make sense in a second. So we have several guests coming in, really good speakers. We're talking about the triune God and really talking about how the Trinity and the way that we preach the Trinity, the way that we evangelize and speaking of the Trinity, how we can actually use it in missions and evangelism. It'll be a really good conference. We're having a sweet time of fellowship and sweet times of worship, which last year people got onto me because I didn't have any music. And that was dumb. That was bad oversight by me, but here we are. So now we're going to have music this year and food, and it's free. So definitely, if you're in the area, come out to the Trinity Missions and Evangelism Conference, and that information will be in the description of this video / podcast. So go find that. There's a link. There'll be a link to the church website where you can find the tab and you can register and all that good stuff. So definitely check that out. But back to what I'm talking about today. One of the speakers, so I said it's kind of iffy, is someone who we're bringing on to the show today. Now, Wes isn't with us today. Wes wasn't able to be with us. But the nice thing about this, and I'll mention it now, is that I'm looking forward to this because this is not just our first guest that Wes and I are having. We're actually bringing on here a third host. That's another reason why it's been a long time since we made our last episode, is because we've been trying to work out some of these things as well. In God's providence, he has sort of worked through some different things with this person who will be coming on, and it just made sense for him to sort of join us, and just the way that we have built up our relationship over the last couple of years. And so, without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you the third host of Regener8d Radio starting this season, and that is Lawson Harlow. Welcome, Lawson.
Hey, man. Glad to be here.
I am glad you're here. I was saying providentially this all worked out. Maybe you can tell us about that a little bit. I know he said we'd start with how we met, and we'll get to that stuff, but maybe you can tell us what's been going on. Actually, before we do that, tell us a little bit about who you are, where you pastor, your family, some of those things, and then maybe kind of segue into that conversation of why are you here? Why are you jumping on board with us now rather than doing your own thing?
Yeah, so like you said, my name's Lawson Harlow. I'm the one of the pastors of Mercy Hill Church in Olive Branch. We planted that church in 2017 with the core team planted out of Longview Point Baptist Church. And so, we're now in our 7th year. The Lord has been really gracious and kind to us in over the last 7 years of just going about the ordinary means of grace, preaching, teaching, evangelizing our area, and have really seen the Lord do just a great work. Slow and steady. I'm largely convinced slow is smooth and smooth is fast in pretty much all areas of life, including serving and caring and growing the local church. And Christ has just built Mercy Hill to his own praise in ways that I still am amazed at. I tell people all the time that church planting is often just sitting back and laughing, watching God do a great work. Anyway, I'm married. My wife's name is Beth. I have 2 children, Rowan, who's our 5-year-old daughter, and Haddon, who is 1.5 years. And then actually we just finished our paperwork to start our 3rd adoption. So Lord willing, we'll have another one added to our household through adoption in hopefully the next year. The average wait time is about 1 to 3 years. So that's our hope. But anyway, so coming on into this venture with Gregg and Wes really just seemed like a natural flow. I've been for the last, I guess, since 2020, 2 of my fellow elders and I had been doing a podcast called Products of Grace we did that for, I guess, about 4 years, really steadily for the first 3. And myself and Blake McCullough and another one of our elders named Don, he was really the banter king, for lack of better terms. And yes, Products of
Yeah.
Grace has a good deal of banter in it. But its purpose was to show Christian camaraderie. And it started out of 2020 when everybody was kind of separated, and really we were just trying to find a way to care for our congregation, to be in their ears and to love them. And so we picked up the podcast and really just fell in love with doing it.
Mhm.
And where we are today, Products of Grace has really reached a conclusion. And it's done that because one of our elders, who was really the one overseeing it, has had to step away, and a faithful brother who just realized he didn't have the time and energy to be able to do it anymore. And so with that, I got the invitation, thankfully, to continue doing podcasting, which I really, really do love, with Gregg and Wes. And so it was an easy yes for me.
Yeah. And certainly a big catalyst of that is just that when you and I met, I think we kind of hit it off, and for various reasons, we'll get into some of those things, but very similar senses of humor, very similar kind of cadences with some of the things that we talk about, and a lot of the same kind of positions theologically, which really obviously is a big important part of this. When Regenerated Radio started, the whole purpose was actually, and I've mentioned this a couple of times, if you go back far enough, if you are one of the like 3 or 4 people who have actually watched this podcast for long enough to follow that long, you know that I started this as a desire to reach out and to give some resources to people who were sort of in the online space, but also were looking at Christian content creation and things like that, just giving advice and resources. And that just morphed out of that eventually, where it wasn't about that at all anymore. It really just became, what was the theological topic that was on my heart at the time? Who was I reading? Who could I reach out to? What author would get back to me and say, yeah, I'll come on your podcast and chat? And so we went through a lot of different topics, and it kind of gradually morphed into, along with my own theological journey, really, I hate that term, but still, my own theological sort of progression into a 1689 Federalist, confessional Baptist that I am, and that's not necessarily perfect descriptions of all 3 of us. And in fact, I think I would be the only one who would say it in those particular words. And yet, I think that there's a brotherhood amongst the 3 of us as Baptists who have very slight minor differences, but all sort of fall within that same heritage of the particular Baptists. And so that's really where it made sense at first, but that's not really how you and I met, right? I mean, you and I guess that this is going to I don't know, some people will be surprised by this. I don't know how many of them will be surprised by this, considering my channel also started off on Twitch as well, where I was playing video games and talking to people about Jesus, which was fun. So maybe that surprises some of you who are listening. But I think the first time I actually interacted with Lawson was underneath the tweet of somebody talking about Pokemon somewhere.
I forgot about that.
Is that right? I'm pretty sure it's like a favorite Pokemon thing. And then you jumped in, and I was like, who is this guy? And so, so reached out and brought you into the Discord server, and then everything took off from there. But what do you remember? Obviously, that's my memory.
Yeah, I do remember that, actually. That was when you didn't have a picture on your Twitter account. You were just your green Methodist logo, which is exactly what it looks like. Yeah. But yeah, I remember that. I don't remember who it was. Maybe it was Seth.
The post, I think, was actually Dustin Phillips.
Okay. Yeah. So anyway, so I got on there and posted, and then I saw yours, and I think we interacted back and forth over favorite Pokemon. Then you posted something about join the Discord, and I'm actually a pretty timid guy. Most people who know me in real life wouldn't put me in that category, but I just really am. So one day I logged in, and you were actually playing Elden Ring.
Yeah.
And you were getting the mess beat out of you, like everybody who plays Elden Ring. And so I joined, and I stayed on mute forever, which is also incredibly abnormal for me. But I'm like, I don't know these people. I'm going to jump in. And then the first question that was asked to me, which I'm not going to mention his name because it would give him too much clout, was Infra or Supra. To which I was like, okay, well, I guess this is the type of server I'm in. And then we started talking from there and kind of hit it off, and did realize we had a lot in common.
Oh yeah, certainly. That's a fun story and an interesting way of, and I was actually talking with another guy in our Discord server the other day. He's another pastor. He's out in Missouri, great guy. And he has, we were just chatting about sort of just trying to encourage one another in ministry and things like that. Every once in a while, we get on a phone call to do something like that, and he made me realize something that we really value. I think as pastors, and you can speak to this too, maybe a little bit. As pastors, I think we really value these online sort of friendships that we've cultivated a little bit, because as much as you are and you must be friends with the people in your church, there's always, like, not always, but and that shouldn't be necessarily, but I feel like sometimes there's this kind of distance between the pastors and the sheep, the laymen in the church, and sometimes it's good to be able to kind of banter and just be yourself around other pastors, and that's kind of where we've been.
And then also, it's really helpful to be able to get an objective opinion. And so, like, when I think about, like, the relationships that I have with you and a number of other guys that are distant, it lets me talk to them about various things happening in my congregation, disconnected from personalities whatsoever. Right. And so that's just, it is that camaraderie, I think, is uniquely helpful. And I think it's solving a lot of the issues with pastoral loneliness from time to time. It's like, no, like, I can have real camaraderie with people who aren't just right down the road from me, but are truly like-minded, and they may be a state or three over.
Yeah, right. I mean, we've got guys in Utah who we love. We've got guys in California who we love. We've got guys in Missouri, Mississippi, Florida. I mean, all over the country, really. Yeah. And just know that they're not prying into what we're talking about. But if we have something that we're trying to work through, we can get that advice. Yeah. And, other perspectives from guys who we know are faithful too. Mm-hmm. We look at Baptist associationalism for such a long time. That was really the goal, right? As an association, you're coming together as a group of churches so that the pastors can have that exact kind of experience. And oddly, as much as we would all eschew digital church and things like that, the idea of associations between those churches and the networks, how they are able to expand because of the internet and because of the way you can make those connections, actually can be really beneficial. I think that this kind of relationship really speaks to that in a big way. But of course, all that's couched within, we're talking about the local church being the center point and all of that. And sorry. I know you are, as much as I am, very high on the local church. So yeah. Well, then talk to me a little bit more about sort of your theological interests. Like, we obviously know you are a Baptist. I wouldn't have any non-Baptists hosting, although I've had my share of Presbyterians and stuff on here. But I guess, how did you come to where you are today? I don't know. Maybe you can give a little bit of, like, your testimony and where how you got to the point where you are now. Yeah,
so that's a good question. So I'm not going to, like, go full life story, but a couple of moments that were really crucial for me. So my parents are divorced, and because of that, I grew up kind of going back and forth between about 3 different denominations: Baptist, and for a very small period of time, Episcopalian and Methodist. And so kind of going back and forth with that, there was a period of my life when I asked a question to one of my parents, and I said, hey, tell me, like, once I'm saved, do I have to continuously, like, ask the Lord to save me, or is it something that's completed? And I was probably 9 or 10 at the time. I actually think that I was in chemo, but so I guess I was about 10. And that question was answered by, I think you probably just need to study your Bible and reach your own conclusion. While I would not answer that question that way as a dad, but nonetheless, it was crucial for me. And the reason it was crucial for me is because it drove me to my Bible. And it kind of began a journey of sola scriptura for me, of understanding biblical authority and making appeals to scripture first and foremost, to what I believe. And so that was really the start of a journey. And then years later, about 15, 16 years old, I was converted. I came to know the Lord. And man, it was just, I think everyone who's been born again, that moment is something that is just jarring in the best possible senses. I've gone from death to life. There's sins that are, almost instantly put away, and then you're acutely aware of others. And so the Lord began a journey of sanctification in my life. About a year later, I was called to vocational ministry, and the inward call, for lack of better terms. And then about 19, I experienced from a local church, actually in my hometown, the outward call to ministry. But while I was in that office is really where I began my theological journey, as you've already stated. And it started maybe abnormally. Actually, it may be pretty normative for people my age. I'm about 33. Shai Linne released an album called Attributes of God.
Yep.
And I'm unapologetically forever grateful for Shai Linne for that album. And he, if I'm not mistaken, he sold a a dual pack, and it was the Attributes of God album when they actually were hard copies, and Attributes of God by A.W. Pink. And I got that book, and I spent the entirety of my first 2 years of college arguing against doctrines of grace, Calvinism, whatever you want to call it. And I got a hold of A.W. Pink's book, Attributes of God, and began to look into who this God is. And I was just staggered. And so that sent me on a love of looking into to who our God is, to a delving into the scriptures, to wanting to understand attributes and the like. And man, the moment that I started doing that, the ball just rolled downhill. Yeah. And so from there, it went into doctrine of salvation, became Calvinistic in my soteriology. And then really from there, the last thing to be reformed, which is often the case, is my ecclesiology. Yeah. Little did I know that's where I wanted, like, that's what I actually wanted. I wanted a reformed ecclesiology. Like, I wanted to believe what the Bible said about the church. And, we both grew up, and I think still this is peddled today, in this concept of an individualistic Christianity, which is so void of life and joy and helps. And so anyway, that was kind of the final straw that fell. I kind of learned through bad situations in the ecclesiology department. I was a youth pastor at a satellite campus of one of the largest churches in the SBC. And I will tell you, to this day, it was the worst 6 months of my whole life. But
this the Lord, someone who had cancer, and
that is coming from someone who had cancer. And but it was one of the most refining moments in my life. Mm-hmm. It strengthened my wife in ways that still I benefit from, which is her ability to look at me and say, "Hey, this is not the way." And just having that voice of a wonderful wife who loves the Lord, she really began to exercise that voice during that time. And so she's just been a great help from the Lord in that. But yeah, anyway, so that was kind of a journey, and then led into church planting a couple of years later. But yeah, I don't want to be too long-winded.
No, that's good. I actually, what you mentioned too, I think is interesting for me. I've told this story once or twice, but actually the very first guest I ever had on the podcast was my father-in-law, who runs a missionary organization of the Jewish people. He's a Presbyterian pastor for 40 years now. But whenever I met his daughter at Living Hope Baptist Church in College Station, Texas, met his daughter there and we started dating. He handed me A.W. Pink, but not Attributes of God, but the Sovereignty of God.
Sovereignty of God, yeah.
In that book, yeah, the same kind of train happened, right? Where you start with the soteriology and the recognition of all of that, but then it flows very rapidly into, for me, it was actually into covenant theology. Which is why, I have this whole story, and I've gone through it with various people, and I'm still intending to record a video for this channel at some point just to cover the entirety of the breadth of the movement and why I moved out of Paedo-Baptist covenant theology into the Baptist articulation of it. But that was where it went for me next, was that idea of covenant theology. I tell people all the time, Presbyterians gave me back like 2/3 of my Bible. And then so now, I used that. But then, of course, that did eventually trickle down. It took, another 7 or 8 years, but it trickled down into the ecclesiology part. And now it's like, that really is, like you say, it's what you wanted. It really is where the Reformation needed to happen. And I think it's where Reformation needs to happen in a big way today. It's one of the reasons why I'm so appreciative of guys like Tom Askell and Founders Ministries and their desire to, what's their motto? It's to, I can't remember now, but to reform churches essentially, and just to get them to that same point. So, but it's a good vision. It's a good work. So, well, that's good. There's a lot of other things I'm sure we could talk about. I guess so I mentioned earlier very briefly that we all have semi-different, not interpretations, but just understandings and kind of maybe articulations is the right word for this too, of our sort of Baptist ecclesiology, our Baptist identity, if you will, where I would say that certainly I'm a 1689 Federalist and a full subscriber to the Second London Confession, right? I know you would be a little bit different in that, so maybe you can speak to that a bit, and then say why you've come to the conclusion you have.
Yeah, so I don't have any major exemptions or scruples or whatever you'd like to call them with the 1689. The two that I often cite that I would probably have some disagreement with is who possesses the authority to baptize. I like the first confessions better there. I know there's debate on what they actually intended and meant. Regener8d's obviously done great work on that. But I have grown to prefer the first. I've grown to prefer the first for a number of reasons. One is I just like the language better. And I know that people are going to stone me for saying that. I agree that the Second London is thorough. It is uniquely thorough, and I'm grateful for it. I regularly appeal to it. And I'm always grateful for the work that was done there. However, the reason I like the first so much is the first rings, in my opinion, to be even more dogmatically Baptist. And if I'm anything, I'm a dogmatic Baptist.
Yes.
And I'm a glad-hearted dogmatic Baptist, which Gregg knows full well. But so the other portion of it is really just based upon the church that we planted. Is I think that the first confession is really is narrow where it must be narrow and broad where it can be broad. And so if I'm thinking about a document that I want to hand to our church members, and just to be clear, our current doctrinal statement is the Abstract of Principles, which is just a summation of the 1689. But probably in the next couple of years, we'll try to push our congregation more to the First London. And so that's the primary reason we landed there, is because I think it's easier to put that in the hands of the members of our church. Say, read this. If you have any issues, let's talk through them and go from there. But being confessional in nature as a church and having hard lines is something that I did not understand for a very long time. I was really kind of the persuasion of the broad gate is the best gate. In regard to who can be a member of a church and who can hold offices in the church and that type of thing. And it was really in the life of Mercy Hill of over the last 7 years where I realized that broad is actually incredibly dangerous. Yeah. It invites discord and disunity. Doctrinal precision and clarity is a recipe for unity. And if my goal for pastoring and serving a local congregation is unity, what I need is clarity, not obscurity. I want everything to be as precise and as clear and as out front as possible, so that for instance, in a new members class, if someone walks up and they're like, "Hey, what do you believe about men and women?" It's like, well, we've made this really clear. This is exactly what we believe. Or what do we believe about the doctrine of election? Well, here's what our doctrinal statement says, and if you want me to build that out for you, I can. But more light is my basic understanding, so that everyone who's inside the congregation understands where we are. Even if there are some disagreements there, the disagreements can't be the terms that we use are dogma or doctrine, which I know doctrine itself is a broad category, but I'm speaking of like Baptist distinctives really in that doctrine category. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you can hear my daughter right now, she's right out the door. And I love her to death, so I'm not going to tell her to be quiet.
We here at Regener8d Radio love children, believe it or not. So really don't worry about it. I remember being in church. This was actually when I was in a Presbyterian church at the time. But very specifically, it was just one of those days where there was a lot of people who had their kids with them, and the kids were just kind of rowdy, And it was a louder day in the sanctuary, and he just stopped and said, the cries of the covenant, which of course now I'm like, but the sentiment behind it, I actually do.
Yeah.
Like we do. We want children in the sanctuary. Like that's something that I've grown on really, even in the past year or so, just thinking, being here at Trinity and trying to figure out what's the best way of approaching children's ministries? What's the best way of approaching discipleship and discipling your family? Which really, I guess, if I were really to give myself any sort of I know this is completely on the side from everything we were just talking about, but I'm ADD, so just bear with me. It's just, if I could say that there was one thing that I've been growing in and understanding a desire of and the importance of in my own life, and I think in the life of Christians in general, is just family discipleship and the role of a parent, the role of a father. And, Sam Waldron has a great book called A Man as Priest in His Home, and just that role that
I have not heard of that.
Oh, it's really good.
I'll have to look that up. Okay.
I'm going to take, my plan is to take it. We're going through Kent Hughes' Disciplines of a Godly Man right now in our men's group, which is also excellent. But that's the next thing. Once we finish that in our men's group, I'm going to try to get us to move toward that and take it for another read. But it's really good. And just that, I think it's such an important thing. And we're for such a long time, and you hit on it earlier, we were individualistic in our Christianity these days, and to the point where it's actually infiltrated even our families, where fathers and mothers just don't even really grasp the importance and the necessity of discipling their children and raising them in the fear and admonition of the Lord. It's so important, and every generation before us has realized that, but in our day, it's crept into our lives, into where there's a selfishness there, and I've seen it in myself in times where I'm like, I should be doing family worship right now, and I've sent them off to do something. It still happens, but that's just a kind of a continued fight that I think we really ought to be fighting, and I think we need to promote that more. So, sorry, that's a complete aside from the whole confession.
No, I hard agree.
Yeah. But no, I think to your point too, though, what you mentioned about having doctrinal specificity and unity is incredibly important. And even things that I'm seeing here, I won't go into any details, but just as I work through things in the church, and, I've only been here about a year and a half, but I've seen where having the Second London as the confession of our church has benefited us. And I've actually also seen times where I've noted that, well, we actually haven't really been following our own confession in this place, and how that's hurt us. So that's a pretty common thing. And I do think that it's important, but not just for our local churches, right? I mean, we see this at the SBC level too. I know if you want to, I've been talking a lot. You want to mention that at all? I don't know if you
want me to talk about the SBC. So Mercy Hill is actually a member of the SBC, and we're a zealous, let me rephrase. Some of us are zealous. Some of us want out. Just to be honest, I mean, I think I tell our congregation if we were going to get out, we would have gotten out 3 years ago. But I'm really, we talk about associationalism, and I think we experience it in the truest senses, like you and I and a number of other people. Like associationalism, I think actually has hands on other people, not just this like obscure blob of churches that say they're in cooperation with each other. But like I really do have a hope, and my hope is that the SBC will course correct. I'm optimistic about this. I wasn't optimistic 3 years ago. I remember like hands in face, almost in tears, the day that I heard J.D. Greers' sermon, "The Fall Affects Us All." Where he, I think, just hard compromised, and thinking about going to the SBC that year and seeing some of what I believe through the drift. I mean, complementarianism doesn't even mean what it once meant anymore.
Right.
It's a dead word. It's been almost completely ruined. And so but inside of the SBC, my great hope is that local churches will be the primary representative again, that the platform will find itself to be largely debased by the ordinary, simple, faithful brothers who preach the word. The congregations and the members of the churches, I think, would be loudest. And I think that if you have that loud voice back, I think the SBC course corrects in and of itself, because I think you have predominantly very conservative, faithful people inside of our churches. And so, we're middle ground. Like we've had conversations about withdrawing, about not, and right now I'm really hopeful that this next meeting will have the second passing of the law amendment, which will solidify some things, and then from there, I think there's just further course correction. I think there's going to be a huge split either way on the law amendment.
Yeah,
I really do.
We'll have to see what that pans out like. I know this is actually will be the first year that I'm able to even go to the convention to vote. So I'm looking forward to going and casting my ballot in favor of that for sure. I think it's necessary, and I really do think it's interesting. Well, I'll come back to that in a second, but just thinking through the SBC stuff, when I came here, I had a similar mindset where I was ready to go, man. And I was only, 2022. And so really it was last year's convention. I think you said the same thing. You went there and you became much more optimistic about it after what you saw there. And I think I did too, to an extent. It also helps when you have a guy like Tony Mattia here who is, SBC runs in his veins. and despite the fact that he's a good Reformed Baptist brother and a confessional guy, he's been through the wars, in his 42 years of ministry. Literally, he's been through the wars, the conservative resurgence and everything. And so there's that, like, I have mentioned to a couple of people, even speaking with, well, I won't name names on that, but speaking with some people who have been around a lot longer, have a lot more experience than I do. And just they're just the way that I've expressed it to them is essentially that guys our age don't really have that institutional loyalty built in like that. We'd much rather just cut it off, cut the hand off. That's impure, so let's just do it. And so it really is reactionary sometimes. It can become overreactionary pretty quickly. And so I think we see that occasionally, especially on the Twitterverse or X, whatever you want to call it. You see people just their entire identity is built around like, well, how do we figure this out? But I have an optimism about it too, and I think that it's good. And plus, there's not really a whole lot of reason just to like jump ship when it's not really costing you anything. It's just
and I think there's so much to gain. Like Mercy Hill was planted as an SBC church. Like we received support and dollars and helps and training. Some of the training was abysmal. Some of it was excellent. Like I'll never forget sitting in the preaching training one day and they're like, all right, we're going to grab Andy Stanley's resource on preaching. I'm like, no, I will not be doing this. And so like, there's that type of thing. And there's also, and I think most importantly, you got local pastors who reach into those situations and help and train, and you can partner with those people. And so there are good things being done. And the more I watch young men, and by young, I'm speaking really anything under 40 at this point, the more I watch the men who are coming up, the more confidence I have, because I don't think you have much nominal in that. You've got men who are like, I know exactly what I believe and I know what I want to do. And you have that really on both sides. Yeah. And I think the idea that we're going to live in camaraderie with that, I think it's just not going to happen. That we're dogmatic on truth, we're dogmatic on doctrinal precision, and we're dogmatic on mission. Like the whole concept of the mission first is always a play right before you ask me to compromise on the doctrine that I'm supposed to be teaching the nations, right? Yeah. It's like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to hold to the mission, and by that, I'm going to hold to the doctrinal precision.
Right.
And so I think what you've got is good, faithful men who are wanting to build something and recover something at the same time. And so I'm really hopeful. Yeah.
That's one of my biggest pet peeves. I think you mentioned having your hands in your head at that sermon from J.D. Greer. Even last year, though, as optimistic as you could be, I can't remember the name of the guy who preached the conference sermon. The entire time it was infuriating, frankly, because it's just constant casting of aspersions. And we know from being where we're standing that these are men who are desiring to do a good thing and to do a good work and to bring the SBC and kind of, bring it to the right course, I guess. And yet everything is couched in this. Well, if you're not in unity, then you're causing a division and you're, worse than a slender or whatever. It was a terrible sermon to begin with.
And it was against the spirit of the convention. That was
exactly.
There. Yeah. It was so obviously not the spirit of the room.
Yeah. And that's just, I don't understand why that continues to happen. And I mean, we could have this conversation all day, I'm sure. I'd like to get Wesson on that for the SBC. Yeah. But this continual desire to, what it comes across as is just consolidating power for a particular group, and then not really allowing the voices of the messengers to speak in the way that they need to be able to. And so, I'm with you. I think that there's, I don't know. I haven't really considered that there might be a split in that way. I guess I used to think that sooner rather than later, like by now we would already have experienced that. But there's a lot of good men who just want to stay long in the fight and try to continue it. And I think it's good. So I don't know. We'll see where it takes us. But the nice thing is about being Baptist, you're not being drugged along with these things. We retain our autonomy and we can participate if we desire. So
yes, sir.
Okay. Let's kind of shift gears a little bit. I had another topic in my head and I've kind of forgotten what it was. I guess maybe you can go forward a little bit more and tell us. Oh, that's what it was. So we're all in a little bit different situations, and you and I have talked about this a lot, actually. Lawson, opened his home to me very graciously and my family, all 7 of us. Well, no, I guess
They brought sourdough bread.
it was, there you go. Yeah, I did pay you in sourdough. Well, my wife paid you in sourdough. No, but we stayed at his house and stayed up for a while talking about this. But really, one of the things that's just very different is that, I'm in a situation where I come in, I'm pastoring a church that's much older, it's much more established. I don't mean that derogatorily in any stretch of the imagination. It's just an established church, and that it's been around for 42 years here in this community. And the people have been around. A lot of the church members have been here for, 10 times the amount of time that I have now, or considerably longer than that even. So I'm in that kind of church situation, and then you have a very different situation where you're in a church plant, and they're just completely different sets of problems. So I wonder if you kind of want to give me a little bit of what you might say are some of the struggles, or some of the maybe not even struggles necessarily, struggles and highlights, just kind of what's it like to plant a church rather than be in the established one.
Planting a church is the scariest thing that I have ever done. And actually, I think we had, probably on my way to planting, I think I had like 5 people say, "Hey, why don't you plant?" And I was like, "Yeah, hard pass." And actually what I told them was I don't have the skill sets for that. Because I had always thought that planting a church was this work of an entrepreneur who just is a starter and a go-getter and all of that. And I really am not any of those things. I am definitionally ordinary. And so I just really like to do the same thing every week. And I'm like, y'all, planning a church seems like a really difficult task, and you need somebody with a huge personality, and it was a misconception by me. And really what I discovered is that planning a church is just pastoring a church from the very beginning. And so, we began to meet together. We began to pray together. We began to have services, and then the Lord began to draw people to himself and plant them inside the life of our church. Early on, we prayed really diligently, like, "Lord, grant us men to be converted." The first man I baptized at Mercy Hill was 70 years old. And that's one of the greatest joys of my life. And he has become really a grandfather to me. And so it's a joy to watch. So some of the benefits and the joys are, is whatever you really do believe, what you desire and what you want to see the local church become, you set the direction. And I don't mean that like, "Hey, what's your vision?" I mean, your convictions are going to flow over into the life of the church.
Yeah.
And I tell people all the time, I push the ball, right? Like that's my understanding of, when we planted, I was the only pastor. I would not recommend that, but it's what I had. And all I did was push a ball forward, and the ball was, let's do 4 things well. Let's devote ourselves to the apostles' teaching, to prayer, to fellowship, and to the breaking of bread. And I watched the people of God take that ball and just keep pushing it. And so the benefit of it is you set something out and you see it. And I think it is safe to say with some immaturity, right? Like, it's young. It's fair to say a church plant is young. It's a newborn thing. And so I watched the people of God mature with that idea of, let's just do 4 things really, really well. And so the benefits are that you get to set the pace, you get to set the direction. And then the difficulty is, you have to fix all that you broke in the first couple of years. There's nobody else. There's nobody else to blame. Early on, I told everybody, like, "Hey, everything we do sets precedent," and it's true. And some of the precedents I set were wrong. And so, it wasn't as if I wouldn't say that I was in sin for setting them that direction. It was just some ignorance. And I think that elders grow in their office. So I think you can be a qualified man. You can be installed as an elder, but I pray to the Lord that you are not the same man that was installed 10 years down the road.
Right. Yeah.
You should be better. You should be more mature. You should be refined. And so, there were some things that we did early on that I wish that I wouldn't have, but the beauty of a church plant, almost really, I'm 7 years in now, the congregation still responds really well to "Hey, I was wrong here. And we need to change that." I'll give an example. So when we first wrote our Constitution and bylaws, which, that's another fun thing, you get to write your own,
right? Yeah.
Which is a task, and I've revised it 4 times, and I'm about to revise it again. But early on, I made the entry to the local church. If you were coming by transfer or something of that nature, an elder interview, and then the elders say yes, you're in, and that's the whole thing. I completely overlooked the congregation being the gatekeeper,
Right.
and so we're actually changing that as we speak. I mean, Lord willing, I'll present that to the congregation in the next 2 weeks or so. They'll receive it, they'll read through it, and then we'll talk about it, and Lord willing, push that ball forward and allow the congregation to fill their actual role. And some of that was an over response to the previous ways that I saw church being done, where pastors had no authority. They were just preaching monkeys. And that's sincerely they only work on Sunday and Wednesday. They talk for an hour and they go home, and that's the whole bout of it. But so some of those are the blessings are setting them and seeing the good things, the good desires the Lord put in your heart to see a local church to become something, and then the congregation taking it and pushing it forward. And the last thing, and then I'll be quiet, is seeing, and you'll see this too. I mean, I was just kind of thinking you're a year and a half in, which means that you're like breaking ground. But you see the long effect of faithful preaching.
Yeah.
There's no, the greatest joy I've had inside the life of Mercy Hill is seeing the effect of preaching through the book of John and Romans and Jonah and Nahum and Jude in the life of the people of God, where they're molded. And even to the point where I don't necessarily see it after a year. After 5, it's like, my goodness, these people are different than they were 5 years ago. They're stronger. They're more mature. They know the truth. And they've learned in that 5, 6, 7 years how to read their Bibles to where there's just the maturity seems compounding. And so those are some of the great joys of it, for sure.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's a good word and a good exhortation for me too, just because, I mean, there's times where you get discouraged on things. It's not just this conversation either. It's like all day today, people have been hitting me with this. I had an elder meeting with Tony earlier, and we were having the same exact kind of conversation. It's just, you have to remember that you're playing a very, very long game.
Yeah, man.
And you will see the fruit, but it takes a lot longer than you like. And if you're like me, and I don't mean to speak for you, but probably yourself too, a little bit, like, we have a more youthful idealism and a desire just to like get something done, and to make it right. We see something that's wrong, we want to make it right immediately. But the problem is, especially with a congregational polity, and that's not a problem. We believe that's biblical, but with a congregational polity, what comes with that is the fact that you are not just making a decision; you are discipling an entire group of people into a decision. And so those are things that I'm learning and growing in. And, that's part of being in a more established church too. This church has been here for 40 years and they've done things in very specific ways. The blessings behind it, right, are that we have an incredible facility here. I mean, I don't think, you haven't gotten up here yet, but you'll get to see
but
it.
I will soon.
Yeah. And it's a wonderful facility, but it's like, well, how do we use that facility? What are the things that we can do in this facility, and how are we to actually take advantage of it for the purposes of the kingdom of God? And those are things where, like, okay, well, we need to actually work through that and disciple people into a better understanding of certain things, certain things, ways and the decisions are made. You mentioned bringing members in, they've done that where they have votes here in the past, but, well, how do we continue that, or how do we do it in a way that's a little bit more guarded, maybe? So there's just little things here and there where it's like nothing that's going to throw off the fact that it's a very faithful church, and it has been a very faithful church for a long time, which I'm so grateful for, to be able to come into that situation. But then you see, like, okay, well, now we've got a lot of discipleship to do to make us to make smaller changes. So, and that's fine. That's the role, that's the job. And so I'm happy to continue in that work. And the Lord has blessed us richly here. So we're grateful for it too. Well, do you have any topics of discussion you'd like to broach before we sort of wrap up?
Let's talk about the Nephilim.
Oh my gosh, I knew.
I'm kidding. You asked the major differences, and I thought to myself, I've been sitting on this all week, because it's like, what I'm going to do is he's going to ask the differences, and he's going to want a real one, and I'm going to give him the most cliche troll answer. But anyway,
No,
sorry,
well,
that was my banter section. You're welcome.
Yeah, we need a little banter here and there. Now, for those of you following along at home, Lawson has the very much the angel.
Where's Wes on
baby
this?
on view, and then I take the correct Sethite view. So,
holy moly, where's Wes on this? Wes has got to be with me.
Good question. I would be willing to bet he's with you.
Gotta be.
I don't know for sure, so I'll have to try and
anyway.
But yeah, so that's good. That's funny.
Well, I look forward to many a times of ganging up on you.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that'll be a fun episode. We'll do a whole episode on who were the Nephilim and what are the giants. How do we deal with all that text? Actually, that would be kind of a fun episode to do. So maybe that'll come up soon.
I'll bring the big guns in. I've got a friend of mine that I would want to bring into that one and be like, okay, let's convince him. Let's do it. And then I wish I could convince you before the Sunday, but alas,
no, not gonna happen. And then yeah, well, I'll get David. It'll be great.
I don't want to get yelled at for an hour.
All right. No, well, are there any other differences though? I don't know. I'm just trying to think through that. I mean, I'm sure there's little things here and there, but I feel like
I don't think so. I mean, I stand by my original statement that Gregg's right about everything except for when he disagrees with me.
It's reasonable.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
You have the correct view of the local descent, so that's good.
Which is what? Sorry, remember I'm
the local descent of Christ into Sheol, and
oh yes, absolutely I do. Which is also you're right. That is the correct view, which David will also yell at me about. But yeah, I can't think of anything else off the top of my head that we have major differences or disagreements about. That's it's like the camaraderie here is we can have really hard-lined agreement on dogmas and our doctrinal distinctives, and then inside of the third tier or whatever term you'd like to use, issues, it's like it just makes for good conversation and good fun.
Yep. Well, good. Well, I appreciate you coming on, and we've gone through all this stuff. I'm sure we'll have many more good conversations around similar topics and themes going forward. That really is the goal. For those of you following along at home, I'm just going to be honest with you. We don't have like a set schedule of episodes right now. The plan is more or less to just work between the three of us and maybe just two of us one week, and maybe just all three of us one week, and maybe occasionally we may just put out videos with one person. I did that recently when I went to Founders Conference, and I put out a video that just kind of went over how what my thoughts were and what my feelings were about that conference, which were very positive. And so stuff like that, I want to give both Lawson and Wes an outlet for that as well, because I know, Lawson, you mentioned, what was it that you had talked about that you were thinking you wanted to go through?
Duties of Christian Fellowship by Owen.
Right, yeah, because you just read that, and ironically,
I went on vacation and I read the whole thing in a night, and I thought to myself, this is one of the most important works. And Owen is, he eclipses everything else by, his obvious, just massive amounts of works. This one's so small, but it's so precise and so helpful. I just thought to myself, man, this would be good for any congregation.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I actually pair that usually with Keach, The Glory of a True Church. You pull those two together and you have just a really good ecclesiological foundation. So those two, and they're both really short and really sweet, really easy to get through. And for being more or less, Puritan works, they're very readable. Even Owen, who is kind of, infamous for being wordy and kind of difficult to approach, that particular book, The True Duties of Christian Fellowship, is pretty easy.
It's easy, yeah,
all things considered. So yeah, definitely would recommend that. And so that may be something that you see a video pop up here at some point. We'll need to talk about what that looks like, but a video pop up from just Lawson, or Wes has things that he'd like to add on, I'm sure, as well. So there will be some solo stuff, there will be stuff with two people, there will be stuff with three people. The goal of this was to kind of remove some of the pressure from myself, actually, because it had become a thing where it's like, now I'm pastoring, and it's a lot harder for me to sit down and just weekly do a full-on interview and have it all planned out with the authors of the books or the professors or whoever I'm talking to. So I don't have to do that as much anymore. We can have a little bit more dialogue, a little bit more banter, and I don't even necessarily have to be in every episode, and other people can think of some topics, and it just takes a lot off of me, and I think it provides I don't know. It's more listenable, in my opinion, when you have
Fair, yeah.
multiple people who are comfortable with each other enough to joke around or whatever the case may be. So, looking forward to it. Yeah, you got anything to add before we close out?
No, man, I'm looking forward to it. I'm grateful for the opportunity. I think this medium is a good one. It's good for just good conversation. It's good for working through different issues. I'm grateful for the opportunity. So thank you for bringing me on.
I Haddon agrees, I guess.
Haddon does agree.
All right. Well, for the rest of you guys, we appreciate you joining us today and look forward to the next episode. We don't know, like I said, exactly when it will be. I'm not on an exact schedule right now, but I promise it won't be, 2 or 3 months like this one was. We're a little bit more set and we're a little bit more ready to go, I think, with some of this stuff. So be looking forward to those. If you have questions or comments or ideas for topics, things you want to hear us talk about as a bunch of SBC kind of Reformed Baptists, we are more than happy to field those. And so please leave questions in the comment box below or send them to us at email. I actually have an email address that I set up for this. I completely forgot about regener8dradio@gmail.com with the 8. We may need to rebrand at some point. We'll see. I don't know. This is all fun and games for us. So we're looking forward to it, though. But thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode.